And maternal care has also been shown recently to transmit across generations, which means that the amount of care a mother provides for our pups could significantly indicate how much care that our female pups will provide for their own kids when they grow to adulthood. This suggests that if maternal care was involved in mitigating the effects of prenatal alcohol exposure and it's transmitted across generation, the behavioral characteristics may also be transmitted across generation. And that was another reason why we wanted to understand the changes in maternal care as a result of this prenatal alcohol exposure to see if it's a possible mediating factor causing this behavioral effect. So this leads us to a hypothesis for this project. And our hypothesis states thus, that prenatal exposure to low-dose ethanol will increase juvenile ethanol intake and also decrease adolescent sensitivity. And we also expected that this subunit alpha-1 and alpha-4 of GABA-A receptor would be downregulated, so they could explain why we could find some reduced sensitivity to alcohol-induced sedation in adolescents. And finally, we were expecting that this same effect would be observed in the after generations that were not directly exposed to ethanol in utero. This project was designed to make the female offsprings and to make the females and expose them to either 1 gram per kilogram alcohol or water, or leave them undisturbed in their colony rooms on gestational days 17 through 20. It's a very short period. And the offsprings were going to be tested for behavioral for behaviors postnatally. On postnatal day 1 through 6, we observed maternal behavior. On postnatal day 14, which is representative of juvenile stage, we tested the pups for ethanol intake, and that was 5% ethanol. And on PNB42, we tested another set of offsprings for sensitivity to alcohol-induced sedation at 2 different doses, 3.5 grams per kilogram and 4.5 grams per kilogram. And another group, which is the third group, were rapidly decapitated without being tested for any behaviors, and the brains were harvested for GABA-A expression analysis. The last set of offsprings were allowed to grow into adulthood, and they were mated within treatment to produce the F generation. Now, the F generation were not disturbed through gestation, and after birth, all behavioral tests were also conducted on this offspring. Please note that when we say within treatment mating, we mean that control males, we mean that we control females, ethanol males with ethanol females, and water males with water females. And also, for this project, we only tested the males during adolescence. However, the intake test during infancy was done in both males and females. Experiment 1 consists of the behavioral test. And like we said earlier, the objectives were to investigate the effects of prenatal alcohol exposure at this low doses to the effect on juvenile ethanol intake, adolescent sensitivity, and also to see if maternal care was altered by this prenatal treatment. And we also interested in seeing those behaviors in the F1 and the F generation. The next couple of slides will demonstrate to you the behavioral procedures. The gestational administration of water or ethanol was done via gavage. And as you can see in the picture, a polyethylene tube was passed through the mouth into the stomach of the pregnant dam. And water or ethanol was carefully delivered into the stomach. And like we said earlier, the control offsprings were not disturbed from their colony rooms at all. On postnatal days 1 through 6, the dams were observed and scored for the demonstration of crucial elements of maternal care. And these elements include determine, as you can see, a dam leaking and giving a pops. Arch-back nursing, as you can see, a dam arch-back while nursing a pop. And retrieval. Some other behaviors we observed were licking and grooming while in contact with the pops, and licking and grooming while arch-back nursing. And we also were interested in understanding how much time they spent away from the pops. Arch-back nursing was scored on a scale of 1 through 4. As you can see, 1 is not so arched, and 4 is completely arched. And there were 25 observations for each leader per observation session. There were 5 observations per day, and there were 6 days of observation. This came to a total of 750 observations per leader during the 6 days. On postnatal day 14, alcohol intake was measured. And to do this, an intraoral cannula was planted in the cheeks of the pups. And ethanol, 5% ethanol or water, was administered through a pump. And the pups had the choice to either ingest the solution, which was an indication of them liking it, or spit it out, which is an indication of not liking it. And so, total consumption was measured as the body weight gain immediately after the session, as this pups were weighed right before the session as well. And the last behavioral test was adolescent sensitivity, which was measured with the loss of brain reflex paradigm. This paradigm measures sensitivity by administering a sedative dose of ethanol intraperitoneally to the rat. And a rat is said to have lost its riding reflex when it loses its impulsive ability to flip back on its forepaws when it's placed on its back. As we know, rats would not allow you to put them on their backs. The duration between when the rat lost its riding reflex and when it gains it back is what we designate as the loss of riding reflex duration, and it indicates their level of sensitivity. And when the rats have lost the riding reflex, they are put in this V-shaped throw till they regain it back. And for this behavioral procedure, we used 20% ethanol. And here are the results. This first slide is the result from the juvenile ethanol intake. This is the F1 generation result. On the left is water intake, and on the right is ethanol intake. Please remember that no subjects were used for any 2 experiments. On the right, we can see that there was no significant difference in water consumption across all treatments. However, to the group that was given ethanol, we can see that there was a significant increase in ethanol consumption compared to the water group. Although there was no significant difference between the ethanol group and the control group, it only approached statistical significance. And that was what we expected, that prenatal alcohol exposure would increase alcohol consumption at this stage. Very importantly and very interesting to us, when we observed the F2 generation that were not directly exposed to ethanol when they were in utero, we could see the same, that there was no significant effect of treatment in water consumption. However, when they were given ethanol, we could see a significant increase in consumption of ethanol compared to both control and water groups. This indicates to us that the prenatal alcohol exposure significantly increased alcohol consumption, both in the F1 and the F2 generation. The next set of results are the results from the loss of riding reflex duration experiment. And this slide demonstrates the 3.5 grams per kilogram. The graph on top is the loss of riding reflex duration, which is a measure of sensitivity to alcohol-induced sedation. And the graph on the bottom is the BECs at awakening. We could could see that the ethanol group had a reduced sleep time compared to the water group, and this shows that they were less sensitive to alcohol-induced sedation compared to this group. Again, we didn't find this difference between them and the untreated control group. And this was supported by the BEC analysis, which shows that this ethanol group were getting their right and reflex at a higher blood ethanol concentration compared to the other two groups. The F2 generation were also observed with this same behavior. And like we expected as well, there was a significant reduction in sensitivity to alcohol-induced sedation at the same stage compared to the water group. And again, they had higher blood ethanol concentration at within compared to the water group. This also suggests that there could be that prenatal alcohol exposure could reduce sensitivity to alcohol-induced sedation. This is the result for the 4.5 grams per kilogram. Unlike we expected, there was no effect of prenatal ethanol treatment at this dose, both in the F1 and in the F generation. And likewise, there was no significant difference in the blood ethanol concentration at this stage. And lastly, for the behavioral studies, we observed maternal care in this outbreaks. So this data here for the F0 generation were the dams that were gestationally given 1 gram per kilogram alcohol, and the F1 generation were their female pups when they grew up and they produced the F2 generation. As we can see, prenatal gestational alcohol treatment significantly increased licking and grooming behavior compared to water and ethanol group. And also increased archback nursing, the frequency of archback nursing compared to the water group, but not the control group. And lastly, the licking and grooming behavior while in contact was significantly increased in the ethanol group compared to the control group. But the difference between the ethanol group and the water group approached significance. In the F2 generation, there was no effective treatment on any of the behaviors that we observed. And so, a summary of the experiment 1, the behavioral test, shows that prenatal alcohol exposure increased juvenile ethanol consumption both in the F1 and the F2 generation, and it reduced adolescent sensitivity both in F1 and the F2 generation. However, this effect was still specific. And also very importantly, we could see that the effect of gestational treatment during maternal care was not altered in the F1 generation. So this suggests that this behavioral effect that we see in both generations may not be mediated by alterations to maternal behavior. Experiment 2 consists of the brain analysis, and our objective was to investigate the effects of prenatal alcohol exposure on GABA A receptor alpha 1 and alpha 4 secreting protein expression, both in the F1 and the F2 generations. Now, our hypothesis was that this subunit protein expression will be downregulated both in F1 and the F2 generation. At least that would partly explain why we see a reduced sensitivity to alcohol-induced sedation in this adolescents. And may I remind us again that this were done just in adolescents and were done in just adults. A brief overview of the methods for this brain analysis. Brains were harvested from adolescent males that had not been used for any behavioral tests. And brain regions were harvested by microdissection, and also fractions were homogenized by syndication from all those brain regions, except for this for the cerebral cortex and the cerebellum, where only half of the tissue was used for also a fraction. The other half was used for the P2 centesimal fraction. And the difference between the whole cell and the centesimal fraction is that the whole cell gives us information about what's going on in the entire neuron, but the P2 centesimal fractions takes us closer to the synapses and helps us understand what's going on at the synapse. And finally, the behavioral receptor serine expression was measured in this homogeneous by Western blotting. Please note that due to a lower expression of alpha-4 in the cerebellum, we were not able to quantify this in this room. And here are the results. First, I'm going to show alpha-1 subunit expression, and then I'm going to show alpha-4 on the next slide. For alpha-1 subunit expression, we could see that unlike the downregulation we were expecting, there was actually an upregulation of alpha-1 subunit expression in these brain regions for both the ethanol and the water group compared to the control group. That was fascinating to us. However, in the F2 generation, these differences were absent. Now, this was the result for the centesimal fraction. When we analyzed the whole cell, there was no significant difference between treatments in alpha-1 expression, both in the F1 and in the F2 generations. And the last region where we found an effect was the prefrontal cortex. There was an upregulation of alpha-1 serpentine protein expression in the water group compared to the control group. But there was no significant effect in the ethanol treatment group. Very surprising to us was the F2 result, where we found a reverse of this effect, where the water group were expressing significantly less alpha-1 subunit compared to the control group. And again, there was no effect in the ethanol group. For alpha-4 expression, there was no significant effect in the F1 generation. We didn't find an effect in the F2 either, except for the cerebral cortex also fractions, where the ethanol group expressed significantly less alpha-4 compared to the control group. And the difference compared to the water group approached significant. So a summary of the results from the brain analysis was that, as we explained earlier, the differences that we found. Every other region that has an X shows that there were no significant differences in the treatment groups, both in the F1 and the F2 generation. And so, the results of this project suggest, and it also agrees with previous findings, that prenatal alcohol exposure can increase ethanol consumption during the juvenile stage. And we further demonstrate that this effect can also be transmitted to the F2 generation. The mediating mechanisms are not yet known. However, the endogenous opioid system has been strongly implicated in mediating alcohol consumption, especially in this stage of development. And we're suggesting that it would be involved in this transgenerational transmission. However, we need to conduct some further experiments to verify that. Secondly, the results of this project agree with previous finding that prenatal alcohol exposure can reduce sensitivity to alcohol-induced sedation. However, this is the first time that it's been demonstrated in adolescents. It's also the first time to demonstrate that this effect can be dose-dependent. And finally, this is the first time it's demonstrated that it transmits across generations, not just in the F1, but also in the F2. Thirdly, we could see that the VAG adds some significant effect, especially when it comes to the brain analysis. While this is very interesting to us, it's been suggested that the GAVAG treatment could be stressful, especially during the handling process, and this could contribute a prenatal stress effect as an additional factor. this has just been suggested. There is no empirical evidence to prove this yet. And current work in our lab is trying to understand the effect of gavage on the dam that has been exposed in terms of measuring chords in those dams, as well as chords in the pops that are inside her after gavage treatment. Hopefully we can find some good explanations to at least further our understanding of why we could see the effect of gavage in this behavioral experiment. And finally, we could see that the prenatal ethanol exposure altered GABA-A subunit expression in a brain region-specific manner. However, it was not very surprising to us that we found this effect in the cortex. The reason being that gestational days 14 through 20 is known as a specific period when the GABAergic system develops in the fetus, and exposure to ethanol during this period will interfere with this developmental process. And so, I mentioned that this development was the cortical development of the GABAergic system, and so our treatment could have interfered with this development process, which is why we've seen some effects in the cortical region. However, this is just an hypothesis, by the way. We still need some further investigations to verify this. And also, we're suggesting that maybe not just alpha 1 and alpha 4 are being affected. Maybe some other subunits have been affected that we do not know yet. Take, for example, we recently quantified the alpha subunit in the stem fractions for the F1 generation. And we found that there was a high expression of this subunit as well in the F1 generation compared to the control group. These and maybe some other subunits are also being altered and significantly influencing this result. I was going through some articles recently that were also talking about the gamma-2 significantly influencing ethanol-induced sedation hypnosis. And lastly, we're thinking that some other brain regions, just like the thalamus, may be involved in this behavioral effects that we are seeing. And this will require further investigations. In addition to this, there might be some other components of neurophysiology that mediates sedation hypnosis, just such as neuroactive steroid synthesis and metabolism, and their actions at the GABAergic receptor. All this could also contribute to the behavioral differences that we observe. In our future directions, like I mentioned earlier, we are interested in distinguishing between the effects of ethanol and the effects of gavage stress. We are also interested in understanding sex differences, as this behavioral tests during adolescence were only conducted in males. We are trying to see what's going to happen in the female as well. And also, we would like to understand what happens in adulthood and if there are sex differences. Beyond the F2 generation, we would like to know what happens in the F3 generation and see how far this goes. And lastly, we would like to also better understand the mechanisms that mediate this effect. So, in conclusion, firstly, prenatal alcohol exposure, at least at this low dose, significantly alters alcohol use-related behaviors across generations. Secondly, this effect may not be mediated by the GABAergic system, or may just be partially mediated by the GABAergic system. Thirdly, this also seems not to be an effect of alterations in maternal behavior. Fourthly, the origin, this project reveals that the origin of alcohol use behavior may trace back generations, and so it may not be as a result of immediate generations being exposed to alcohol or in utero exposure only. And lastly, as an answer to the first slide, no amount of alcohol is safe during gestation or during pregnancy. give God the glory for the success of this project, and I want to say a big thank you to Nicole, Skip, and Linda for being on this committee. Thanks for your advices. I want to say thank you to my lab mates, Amanda and Marissa. I want to say thank you to the undergrads and my master's funded program that brings to the doctorate. Thanks to the DIRC and NIAAA for funding contributions. And the last but not the least, thank you so much for listening.
So my question was related to the attenuated sensitivity to the sedative properties in adolescents. It appeared that your ethanol group and your control group were pretty similar. So to me, your attenuated sensitivity is only related to against the water group. So why do you think that is, or how would you explain that? Because to me, it looks like the water group is the different one there.
That's a very good question. Just taking back to the slide. So, we have an hypothesis of why this affects, this looks like that. And it's the fact that some recent evidences, including the works of Amy Perkins, who's not here today, suggests that alcohol could be alleviating some effect of stress, the stress through gavage. That is an hypothesis that we are having right now, and we're trying to build on in the future. Some other groups have shown that when you administer chronic stress to rats and you give a group alcohol immediately after the 2-hour stress for a couple of weeks, and you test them for cognitive performance later, the group that was stressed and not given alcohol have some cognitive deficits, whereas the group that were given alcohol after every stress session didn't have any deficits. So this could also suggest that alcohol could be providing some stress alleviation, and therefore returning those groups back to the control levels. That is an hypothesis that we have, and we are looking into the future to being able to demonstrate it. And part of the work we're doing is trying to understand if there's truly a stress effect by measuring cohort responses in the pregnant dams that were converged. Oh, sorry.
So I was really interested in the alpha-1 and the alpha-4 things. So I have kind of two questions, but they're related to it.
Sure.
First is you were talking about potential effects of the gavage on stress impacting the alpha receptors. I'm wondering if you know of any research that specifically links these receptors to stress. Then the other thing that I was kind of wondering, the other potential maybe source of variances, does expression of these receptors maybe vary across mothers? Maybe you had one sort of line of rats that was randomly assigned, had mothers that had higher alpha-1 expression. Does anybody ever, or have you ever tried to, I don't know, tag expression to the mother to reduce between subject variability, or?
The second question first. We have not seen that yet. And that's a very interesting way of going about understanding the changes. However, and to the first question as well, we have not seen any literature that connects the prenatal stress and the expression of alpha-1 in the brain. However, a group in the past have investigated the effects of gavage, alcohol gavage, in guinea pigs, and they also saw an upregulation of alpha-1 receptor subunits in adult guinea pigs. However, they did not have a third control group, so that a lot of studies do not include these two different control groups, but we try to include it just to understand if gavage was any additional factor determining the behavioral effects. So, no literatures link them up yet. That's something we can look into in the future, and hopefully we can have some data that pointed in the right direction. Yes, Terry.
So comment and then a question. It's a very interesting project. If you're going to go down the stress road, I would discourage you from going after court, because I think that's unlikely to be the mediator, because you have this interesting dissociation where the alcohol exposure will reduce the subjective feelings of distress, but it will actually potentiate the court response, which is opposite the effect that you would be going after here. So I would think about that carefully before going down that road. Second, my question really was about the maternal care. So I think it's interesting that the maternal care didn't seem to differ. It sort of surprised me, actually. And so, sort of two questions. One, did you do like a analysis of covariance to try and determine that, the lack of effect of maternal care on alcohol consumption, or is it just based on, or your conclusions based just on the pattern of results?
Can you say that again?
Did you do like a statistical test, like analysis of covariance, to determine
between the maternal care variations and
right.
consumption? No, we did not.
Okay. So do you think? I guess my question is, do you think that do you have sufficient sensitivity in your maternal care measures to really detect an effect of maternal care, or do you think to really rule that out you need to go back and do some cross-fostering?
So the fact that the effects in the effluent generation, the reason why we ruled it out was because the effect on ethanol intake was observed in both generations, and we're expecting that if maternal care, if variation in maternal care was mediating this effect, we should expect some changes as well in this F1 generation that will cause, or at least be related to, the increase in the F2 generation drinking. That was the reason why we ruled this out. On the other part of the question, it's suggestive that the variations in maternal care could influence alcohol consumption. Recent study in our lab using trying to actually quantify to relate the effect of variations in maternal care, where we have high maternal care and low maternal care offsprings drinking. We did not find a significant effect on drinking between these two groups at the moment. So that kind of also points us in the direction that maternal care variations may not be the factor mediating this effect, this increased consumption in these offsprings. Did I answer the question? Yes.
Well, I just want to comment on Terry's point, which is really, really critical about this maternal care. Historically, this paradigm was designed because maternal care didn't seem to affect maternal care. That is, 25 years ago when Juan and I were dealing with this, and Juan Molina really gets the credit for developing this paradigm. He did a great job of it. One of the criteria that we wanted to use was that it didn't make any difference on maternal care. This method of I have to say that the tests of maternal care weren't nearly as good as the ones that Nicole has developed and were used here. And so that's why it's really important to have this. But the whole issue of maternal care is critical here, and I'm glad you nailed it.
Yes.
I had a couple questions. So you use beta-actin as your control.
Yes.
So beta-actin has been shown to be effective by prenatal alcohol depending on the timing and the dosing. So I would maybe suggest looking at another protein, housekeeping.
GATPH?
So there are a couple studies that have actually, and it's all brain region specific too, so just kind of just a comment. The second question is, so your increase in alpha-1, how do you, I know you were looking into the potential mechanism later on, but how do you foresee that resulting in some of these behavioral changes in the cerebral cortex?
Well, that's a very good question. We were only being excited by the fact that a previous group had also seen this upregulation, and so that was a kind of confidence booster for us that, well, maybe it's just that's what happens when they're being exposed to ethanol. Now, the implications of this upregulation in behavior, we don't know yet. We may have to conduct some some tests of more activity, maybe like not at a lower dose of a lower locomotor activity dose of alcohol, and trying like the rotor test, or open field test, and trying to see the motor activity is altered in a different way that could say why, that could relate to the increased alpha-1 subunit expression. But at the moment, we don't seem to have any behaviors that look different and point us in the direction of the behavioral implications of the upregulated alpha-1 subunits.
So more alpha-1 would mean there's more for ethanol to bind to. So you should have more of a sedative effect.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're expecting. And that was why we hypothesized that we were expecting a reduced expression of alpha-1, which would explain why they're less sensitive to alcohol-induced sedation. But this direction points us that the behavioral results indicates that this, although the alpha-1 is upregulated, it may not be influenced in this behavior. So maybe some other behaviors that are also motor related could be altered, and that's something that we may be interested in the future. That's a good question. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Dave.
Alpha-1 is typically responding to ethanol at concentrations that are going to be higher than the motor taxic effects. So the idea with this is actually more related to the idea that actually might be working on motor ataxic circuits, albeit maybe indirectly. We've seen that through electrophysiological response and reaction response that are going to be 50, 60 to 70 millimolar, but not lower than the motor ataxic effect. My question is related to delta.
Yes.
And the fact that you're actually getting the increase in delta, which is actually going to piggyback on Marvin's, because if you have an increase in delta, which are the quintessential extrasynaptic receptors, and responds, depending on who you ask, to very low doses, those that are going to be within the legal drinking limit. So if you actually have these responding, where you have an enhancement of this expression of delta-containing receptors, how do you take that into account? The fact that if you actually have these increases, they should definitely be more sensitive. So we actually think that's a good the system.
So,
He showed you the results
Yeah.
of the discussion.
right here? Okay, so the changes in the GABAergic system in this project is not what we expected, and it's at the moment I've not gone deeper into understanding the exact reasons why this are seen in the behavioral implications or the function of the system. What we just concluded at the moment was that the systems may not be contributing to this behavior that we are seeing.
I would take a look at Gina McGuire's work. She's actually looked at maternal care and delta knockouts, and she says a differential response in the knockouts on actually reductions in maternal care. And there actually might have an effect here where you actually might be seeing increases in delta because you actually might be getting decreases in GABAergic neurobiology in general. So it might actually kind of compensate for the system. One of the ways that you actually might be able to look at this is if you actually look at either GABA content, or if you actually see if VGAT itself, vesicular indirectly in itself, is being changed.
So when you say GABA content, like GABA, the neurotransmitter itself.
The actual neurotransmitter itself. That'll be a little difficult. You have to just go through some of the mechanisms to see if you have a compensatory change.
Well, thank you for that very important suggestion. Any other questions?
All right, let's exclude